There is a quiet intelligence moving beneath the surface of life, an order that does not rush, does not argue, and does not explain itself in advance. We live in a world that glorifies immediacy. We are taught that speed equals success, that delay is failure, and that waiting is weakness. Yet the deeper truth reveals the opposite. Waiting, when conscious, is not passivity. It is participation in a rhythm larger than the ego's demands. What we call waiting is often a period of inner preparation. When life seems still, when doors remain closed despite effort, something unseen is forming within us. The psyche is aligning itself with a future that cannot arrive until we are ready to receive it. If outcomes appeared before inner readiness, they would overwhelm or distort us. The universe withholds not to punish, but to protect. Impatience arises from the belief that we already know what we need and when we should have it. But the unconscious knows more than the conscious mind is willing to admit. Delays expose hidden fears, unresolved conflicts, and attachments that must be integrated before progress can occur. In this sense, time becomes a teacher. Each pause asks us to reflect, to mature, and to listen more deeply to what life is trying to shape within us. Those who learn to wait without bitterness begin to notice subtle changes. Synchronicities appear, resistance softens, what once felt like stagnation transforms into clarity. Waiting becomes an active state of awareness, where observation replaces force and trust replaces control. This is when the individual stops chasing life and allows life to meet them. When the moment finally arrives, it does so with precision. Opportunities emerge naturally, without strain. The reward is not only the external result, but the inner strength developed through patience. What comes too early is fragile. What arrives at the right time carries weight, meaning, and endurance. The universe does not reward those who wait blindly, but those who wait consciously, those who remain engaged, reflective, and faithful to their inner growth. In learning to wait, we learn to align, and in alignment, life unfolds exactly as it must. Waiting is often misunderstood because it is measured by the absence of visible movement. In a culture that equates worth with productivity and speed, stillness is mistaken for failure. Yet waiting, when approached consciously, is not an empty pause, but an active engagement with life's deeper rhythm. It is a state in which the individual remains inwardly attentive, allowing meaning to form beneath the surface, rather than forcing outcomes before their time. What appears inactive on the outside is frequently a period of intense inner organization. Life unfolds according to patterns that cannot be rushed without consequence. Just as the body follows its own timing in healing and growth, the psyche also requires intervals of silence and suspension. Waiting becomes a dialogue between the conscious mind and the deeper layers of the self. During this time, unexamined beliefs, hidden fears, and unintegrated desires rise into awareness. If one refuses to wait, these elements remain unresolved, eventually sabotaging progress. Conscious waiting allows them to be seen, understood, and transformed. Participation in life's rhythm requires humility. It demands the recognition that the ego does not govern all events. When one waits with awareness, control loosens and observation deepens. This shift changes the quality of experience. Instead of battling uncertainty, the individual learns to coexist with it. In this coexistence, subtle guidance becomes perceptible. Intuition sharpens, perception widens, and decisions begin to emerge organically rather than through anxiety or pressure. Waiting also refines desire. When gratification is delayed, superficial wants often dissolve, revealing what truly matters. This purification is not comfortable, but it is essential. The deeper rhythm of life does not respond to impatience, it responds to readiness. Readiness is not a matter of time alone, but of inner alignment. Waiting creates the conditions for this alignment by stripping away urgency and replacing it with presence. There is strength in remaining still while the world demands motion. Such stillness is not resignation, but trust grounded in awareness. It reflects confidence in the unfolding process even when outcomes remain hidden. Those who wait consciously do not withdraw from life. They engage more deeply with it by listening rather than demanding. This listening fosters resilience, because the individual no longer depends on immediate results for validation. Over time, waiting reshapes one's relationship with uncertainty. What once felt like a threat becomes a space of possibility. The individual learns that meaning often arrives indirectly, through reflection rather than action. Life's deeper rhythm moves through cycles of tension and release, effort and rest. To wait consciously is to synchronize with these cycles instead of resisting them. In this way, waiting becomes a subtle form of courage. It requires faith in an unseen order and patience with one's own unfolding. Far from being weakness, it is a disciplined openness that allows life to mature naturally. Through conscious waiting, one does not fall behind life, but moves in harmony with it, allowing what is meant to emerge to do so with clarity and depth. Delays often feel like rejection because the mind is trained to interpret progress only through visible movement. When effort does not produce immediate results, the experience is labeled as failure, even though nothing has truly gone wrong. What is overlooked is that life does not operate on linear expectations, but on psychological and inner readiness. A delay is rarely an absence of progress. More often, it is a signal that something essential is still forming beneath the surface. During periods of delay, the outer world appears unresponsive, but the inner world becomes active. Unconscious patterns begin to surface, revealing motivations, fears, and assumptions that previously went unnoticed. These moments slow the individual down enough to recognize internal contradictions, wanting growth without responsibility, change without discomfort, or success without self-knowledge. The delay exposes these gaps, not to shame but to correct them. Without this inner clarification, any forward movement would rest on unstable ground. Delays also serve as a test of identity. When momentum pauses, the question arises, who are you without constant achievement? If self-worth depends entirely on outcomes, delay feels unbearable. But if identity is rooted in inner coherence, delay becomes tolerable and even meaningful. In this space, the individual is invited to strengthen values, deepen self-understanding, and separate genuine intention from borrowed ambition. What falls away during delay was never meant to last. Inner preparation often requires dismantling old structures. Beliefs that once provided security may no longer fit the person one is becoming. Delays create the psychological room necessary for this dismantling. If life moved forward too quickly, there would be no time to grieve outdated identities or release attachments that no longer serve growth. Preparation is not gentle. It involves confrontation, uncertainty, and reorientation. The delay holds this process until integration occurs. What appears as stagnation is frequently recalibration. Skills are refined, perception sharpens, and emotional resilience develops. The individual learns patience not as passive endurance but as disciplined awareness. Subtle lessons accumulate: how to tolerate uncertainty, how to act without immediate reward, how to trust internal signals over external validation. These lessons cannot be taught through success alone. They are learned through waiting and reflection. Delays also protect. They prevent premature exposure to responsibilities or outcomes that the psyche is not yet equipped to handle. Receiving what one desires too early often results in misuse, burnout, or collapse. The delay ensures that when movement resumes, it does so with stability. What arrives after preparation feels different, less frantic, more grounded, and more aligned with inner truth. To mistake delay for failure is to misunderstand the nature of growth. Failure implies an end, whereas delay implies continuation. Something is still underway. The preparation happening within may not be visible, but it is essential. When the delay lifts, progress feels natural rather than forced, because the individual has changed. What once required struggle now unfolds with clarity. In this sense, delays are not obstacles on the path, they are the path itself, shaping the person who will eventually move forward with purpose and strength. Impatience is often mistaken for ambition or passion, yet beneath its urgency lies a deeper psychological tension. When the desire to move forward becomes intolerant of time, it signals that something within is unsettled. The outer frustration mirrors an inner conflict that has not yet been understood or integrated. Impatience does not arise simply because progress is slow. It emerges because the psyche is divided, pulled between what it wants to become and what it fears it may lose in the process. At its core, impatience reflects resistance to the present moment. The individual seeks escape from discomfort rather than comprehension of it. This discomfort may stem from doubt, insecurity, or unresolved emotional wounds that surface when progress pauses. Instead of confronting these inner realities, the mind projects urgency onto external circumstances, believing that speed will dissolve inner tension. Yet movement without understanding only displaces conflict. It does not resolve it. Impatience often exposes contradictory desires. One part of the self longs for growth, recognition, or transformation, while another part clings to familiarity and safety. These opposing forces create inner pressure. When unacknowledged, this pressure expresses itself as restlessness and irritation toward delay. The individual demands change without fully consenting to the inner changes that such transformation requires. Integration begins when both sides of this conflict are allowed into awareness without judgment. The act of slowing down intensifies impatience because it removes distraction. In stillness, unresolved fears and unmet needs become louder. This is why waiting feels unbearable to some. It confronts them with themselves. Impatience in this sense is a defense mechanism. It attempts to outrun self-reflection. Yet what is avoided internally inevitably reappears externally, often as repeated obstacles or recurring dissatisfaction. When impatience is observed rather than acted upon, it becomes instructive. It points directly to areas of the psyche that demand attention. Perhaps there is an unhealed sense of inadequacy, a fear of insignificance, or an attachment to external validation. By listening to impatience instead of obeying it, the individual begins the work of integration. This work involves acknowledging vulnerability, accepting limitation, and reconciling conflicting desires within the self. Integration does not eliminate urgency overnight. It gradually transforms it into clarity. As inner conflicts are recognized and held consciously, the need to rush diminishes. The individual no longer depends on immediate outcomes to affirm worth or direction. Action becomes more deliberate, guided by understanding rather than anxiety. Progress may still be desired, but it is no longer demanded as a remedy for inner unrest. In this way, impatience serves a paradoxical purpose. Though uncomfortable, it reveals where growth is incomplete. It exposes the places where the self has been fragmented by fear or avoidance. By turning inward and allowing these conflicts to be integrated, the individual regains inner cohesion. Time no longer feels like an enemy, and waiting no longer feels like punishment. What once drove frantic motion becomes a quiet signal guiding deeper self-knowledge and lasting psychological balance. The ego believes it knows when things should happen. It measures life through plans, deadlines, and expectations, assuming that control equals safety. Yet this certainty is fragile, because the ego operates with limited information. It sees only what is immediately visible and interprets experience through desire and fear. Beneath this surface awareness lies the unconscious, a far deeper intelligence that holds memory, instinct, and symbolic understanding. When it comes to timing, this hidden dimension moves with far greater wisdom than conscious intention. The unconscious does not rush because it is not anxious about outcomes. It is concerned with wholeness rather than speed. While the ego demands results to confirm identity and worth, the unconscious seeks integration. It delays events until the psyche is capable of meeting them without distortion. When life does not respond to conscious effort, it is often because the unconscious is resisting premature action. What feels like obstruction is actually regulation. Many inner conflicts arise when the ego attempts to force progress against unconscious readiness. This tension manifests as repeated setbacks, exhaustion, or a sense of being out of alignment. The individual may work harder, push more aggressively, or blame circumstances, unaware that the deeper self is signaling the need for adjustment. The unconscious communicates indirectly through emotion, dreams, intuition, and recurring patterns. Its language is symbolic, not linear, and it cannot be commanded through willpower. Timing guided by the unconscious unfolds organically. Interests change, relationships shift, and opportunities appear in unexpected ways. These movements often seem irrational to the ego, which prefers predictability. Yet when followed, they lead to experiences that feel strangely inevitable, as though they could not have occurred at any other moment. This sense of inevitability arises because inner and outer conditions have finally aligned. The ego fears surrender because it equates control with survival. Letting go of rigid timelines feels like loss of direction, but surrender does not mean passivity, it means cooperation with a deeper order. When the ego listens rather than dictates, it becomes an instrument rather than a tyrant. Decisions made from this state carry less strain and more coherence. Action flows from inner clarity instead of external pressure. Disregarding unconscious timing often leads to hollow success or premature collapse. Achievements gained before inner readiness fail to satisfy or endure. The individual may reach a goal only to feel emptiness or confusion afterward. This is not because the goal was wrong, but because the psyche was not prepared to inhabit it fully. The unconscious had not yet completed its work. When trust is placed in this deeper guidance, patience replaces anxiety. One learns to sense when to act and when to wait, even if the reasons cannot be logically explained. Over time, life begins to feel less like a struggle against time and more like a dialogue with it. The ego's role shifts from control to participation, allowing the unconscious to set the rhythm. In honoring this rhythm, timing reveals itself not as something to be mastered, but as something to be understood and respected. Conscious waiting is not an empty pause, but a deliberate state of awareness in which attention is turned inward while remaining receptive to life. Unlike passive waiting, which is filled with frustration and expectation, conscious waiting is marked by observation, patience, and presence. In this state, the individual resists the urge to force outcomes and instead allows meaning to surface gradually. This shift in attitude changes the quality of experience, transforming uncertainty into a space where insight can emerge. When urgency subsides, clarity begins to form. The constant mental noise created by impatience and fear slowly quiets, allowing deeper perception to arise. Thoughts become less reactive and more discerning. The individual starts to see situations as they are, rather than as projections of desire or anxiety. Clarity does not arrive as a sudden revelation, but as a steady recognition of what aligns with inner truth and what does not. Through waiting, one gains the ability to distinguish between impulse and intuition. As awareness deepens, patterns become visible. Events that once seemed random begin to reveal subtle connections. This is the emergence of synchronicity, moments when inner states and outer circumstances mirror one another meaningfully. These experiences are not created by effort but by alignment. When the individual is no longer imposing rigid expectations, life responds with opportunities that feel timely and relevant. Encounters, ideas, and changes appear at moments when they can be fully understood and integrated. Conscious waiting also fosters alignment by reducing inner conflict. Much of human struggle comes from acting while internally divided. Waiting allows opposing impulses to surface and be reconciled. As inner contradictions soften, decisions become simpler and more coherent. Action taken from this state feels natural rather than forced, as though it is arising from the whole self rather than a fragmented desire. Alignment is felt as ease, not because life becomes effortless, but because resistance diminishes. In this receptive state, intuition sharpens. The individual becomes more sensitive to subtle signals, emotional shifts, bodily responses, recurring themes. These signals guide movement without the need for excessive analysis. Synchronicity reinforces trust in this guidance, demonstrating that inner readiness and outer timing are interconnected. Life seems to respond not to urgency but to presence. Conscious waiting also redefines success. Instead of measuring progress solely by external milestones, value is placed on inner coherence and authenticity. This reorientation changes how choices are made. Opportunities that do not resonate are recognized and declined without regret. Those that align are embraced without fear. Waiting thus becomes an active calibration, continuously adjusting the relationship between inner intention and outer action. Through conscious waiting, the individual learns to move with life rather than against it. Clarity arises from stillness, synchronicity emerges from openness, and alignment develops through self-awareness. What unfolds does so with a sense of rightness, as if each step follows naturally from the last. In this way, waiting reveals itself not as delay, but as the very process through which what arrives at the right time carries a different weight than what is seized too early. It does not demand constant defense or justification because it rests on inner readiness rather than urgency. When something unfolds in its proper moment, it feels rooted, as though it belongs not only to the present, but to the entire path that led there. This sense of rightness is not accidental. It is the result of growth that has matured quietly, often unnoticed, before taking form in the outer world. Premature achievement often lacks depth. When outcomes arrive before the individual has developed the inner capacity to hold them, they tend to create anxiety, confusion, or emptiness. Success without readiness can fracture the self, forcing adaptation before integration has occurred. In contrast, what comes at the right time meets a psyche that has already wrestled with doubt, uncertainty, and limitation. The struggle has shaped strength, and this strength allows the experience to be fully inhabited rather than merely possessed. Timing gives meaning to experience. Events that occur too early are often misunderstood, misused, or taken for granted. When they arrive later, after waiting and reflection, they are recognized for what they truly are. Patience refines perception. It strips away illusion and expectation, leaving room for appreciation and responsibility. Meaning is born not just from the event itself, but from the inner journey that precedes it. Strength develops through endurance. The period of not having, not knowing, and not yet arriving builds resilience that cannot be acquired through immediate gratification. Waiting teaches the individual how to remain grounded without guarantees. This endurance becomes an inner structure, supporting what eventually, because it is connected to personal transformation rather than mere acquisition. In this way, timing shapes not only outcomes but character. The individual who has learned to wait meets life with humility and strength, aware that what truly matters cannot be forced. When something finally arrives, it is received with presence rather than desperation. It becomes part of a larger story of becoming, infused with depth, purpose, and resilience. What comes at the right time does not simply add to life. It anchors it, giving lasting meaning and the strength to sustain it. So if you find yourself in a season of waiting, do not mistake it for abandonment or delay without purpose. Something within you is being shaped to meet what is on its way. Trust the silence, honor the pauses, and remain attentive to your inner life. When the moment arrives, it will not feel rushed or accidental. It will feel inevitable, and in that moment you will understand that nothing was withheld from you. Everything was preparing you,